Hi everyone, here's an in-depth look at Road America in the Radical SR8. The weather is morning, default track temp at 7:30 AM, and the setup is the default Road America setup, with the only thing changed being the brake bias and the fuel load. I brought it down to a 54% front brake bias just to eliminate some of the front locking. Now, entering into turn one, you're wanting to brake between these three cones and the one cone. Around this track, the predominant handling characteristic you're going to experience is understeer. If you brake too late and carry too much speed into the corner, particularly if you're not turning in early enough, you're going to find the car's going to struggle to make the apex. And once it's running offline, due to the fact the corners are quite long, it's just going to progressively understeer more and more as the corner goes on. So in this first sector, you're wanting to make sure you really get it in on this inside curb, brake appropriately, trail brake it in to keep some of the weight on the nose to give it more front end grip and really hit that apex. So I'm braking between the 3 and the 1 cone. That transition nicely to that just inside curb there. And then I can accelerate cleanly out. I didn't catch any of the outside bumpiness or grass, which is waiting for you out there if you go a bit too deep, but you really do want to get on the throttle quite aggressively to push the car out of the corner. A lot of the straights here are quite long, so if you're too tentative on the throttle, you can actually lose pace down the whole straight. And this corner is very similar to the initial corner. You're braking between the 2 and the 1. I'm trail braking the car in once I've got a reasonable amount of steering lock, and you're wanting to move it into about a medium apex. You don't want to get the apex too early because the car needs to be straight on the exit. And if you get an early apex, it sort of makes the car turn too long and could induce a bit of mid-corner understeer. The other thing I found is once you get that sort of understeer by not quite clipping the apex around this track, you tend to attempt to fix it by adding more throttle to make the backslide. So you're finding the car will both kind of understeer then oversteer in the middle of the corner, which is just going to cost you lap time. So smoothly in to the apex and waiting until I can easily go full throttle and accelerating hard out. I find when you get that right, these first two corners almost look a little bit under the limit. Did a long drive down this initial straight, front straight. Now it's very important to get your braking right here because where you brake sort of determines where the car is slowed enough and therefore your entry point into the corner. If you're braking too early, you will find that the car gets slowed to the point that you want to turn in, but you're turning in, you're actually clipping the inside apex, which will bounce the car off the track on the exit. So you really need to make sure that you get the braking marker and you build up to it. Start a bit earlier and then slowly apply later and later braking and more brake pressure so that when you're easing off the brakes, you're trailing it in on entry with the steering and you're actually clipping the apex that way. So I'm braking between the 2 and the 1. I'm applying a lot of brake pressure. I've actually gone nearly full brake lock on this and the car isn't locking the fronts because I've got the brakes set to 54. If it was on the stock 55, it would probably lock the front here. Taking a lot of speed off, just kind of modulating the brake, and then turning into the apex. And you want to get the apex around that middle corner mark to straighten the car and give it a smooth drive out. The exit traction on this corner is quite important. So if you can get the car straight and go full throttle early, it gets a lot better drive out the corner for the little run up the hill. You wouldn't think it would matter too much because it's quite a short straight, but you can lose a lot of time here if you don't get that good run out of the corner. So I've taken about a middle apex, trailed the brakes in a little bit, taken about a middle apex, and then waited until the car was straighter to go full throttle and use this outside bit off the road as traction. There's actually quite a lot of grip out here. When you get the car rotated on this outside curb, it will grip up and accelerate out hard. Now coming into this next hander, you don't want to overstimulate the car on entry. So you're just kind of downshifting and braking smoothly, and you're really needing to make sure you bring it into the apex, because if you go too deep into this corner and miss that apex, you're going to have a very difficult time getting the car rotated and will likely go out and catch that outside curb or getting off track. So getting the downshifts out of the way nice and early, smoothly into the corner, but carrying a fair amount of speed through there, and just slowly accelerating out. I'm not using a lot of that outside curb, just a little bit. Now this corner, it's quite important to push the car through it. It seems like one of those fairly straightforward corners, but in this car it cannot go through there flat. So you really need to grab that inside curb and use all the exit curb to really carry as much speed through there as you can. As if you lift off quite a bit, you can easily lose a tenth or two there. And it doesn't even really feel like you're losing a lot of time, but there is a fair bit of time available to be gained by really pushing the car through this corner. So just lifting a little bit as you can't go through here flat, and taking the inside curb, getting on the apex, and then just going hard on the throttle and using all the exit curb to push the car out. It feels quite on the limit when you're going through there. For in open wheelers, this corner is actually a bit of a nothing corner. You can usually take it full throttle, but in this car, you've really got to maximize the amount of throttle you providing the car and use all the track. Now here it's very important to clip the inside curb. So when you're braking, you come up into this 2 marker and you have to immediately be thinking about getting this apex. If you miss the apex here, you're going to cost yourself a lot of time. So braking around the 2 marker, a little bit before it, braking hard, going down the gears in a straight line just to maximize your braking input, and then rotating the car into about a medium apex. But you need to carry quite a lot of speed into this initial curb. You'd actually be surprised how much speed you can carry on entry, because there's a generous amount of room on exit to catch the car if you carry a bit too much apex speed in there. And it's definitely not one of those corners that you really have to slow down to a near crawl. So once you make it through that left-hander, you need to be immediately thinking about getting the car back to the left for what is one of the more, I would say, difficult corners on this track. You can gain or lose a lot of time around this long right-hander, and it's very important to find the limit of the front end. So you're entering from the far left of the track, and I like to take about a medium line through here. I have seen people in various cars over the years take different line to this corner, but I've always just found with the sort of medium line, sort of closing to the apex and around the late apex point, the most consistent for me. And when you go into this middle of the track bit, you're just trying to feel on the wheel if there's any front end left in the car. And you can feel that by how responsive the car is to minor steering inputs and how the weight loads up through the middle of the corner. So you're just hunting for when you can apply more steering lock and when you can get back on the throttle. What you don't want to do is if you carry too much speed in and the car starts to understeer in the middle of the corner, it can push it quite wide on the exit and you actually miss the apex completely. So you want to really maximize the front end and then smoothly apply the throttle to not aggravate the car on exit. So I run a nice medium line here. Just trying to hunt, you can feel the front end just on the limit, but you don't want to push it over it, and you're bringing the car into a late apex. And you can see that I'm sort of waiting to go full throttle, because you don't want to go full throttle and induce too much understeer or oversteer on exit. You just have to wait until you get the car properly rotated, and then you can go flat. But in this particular instance, I went full throttle momentarily, but then caught a bit of oversteer. You can see I'm just having to make a little correction because the back end's just starting to move a little bit. Then I have to go out of the throttle and come back in it. It didn't cost me a huge amount of time through there, but the car was unsettled on exit, which might not feel the most comfortable in a race situation. It's okay on a hot lap, but in a race, maybe not. So you could just be a little bit more cautious until you pick up full throttle through there and avoid that oversteer. This next section of the track is flat. You don't lift at all through here. Now here it's very important to brake quite late, but to stop the car in the time that you can make the apex. A lot of the corners around Road America are quite simple. They're fairly 90-degree corners where you brake late, enter from as far left as you can, clip the apex and exit wide. So fairly traditional corners, but it's very important to both maximize the amount of braking input you put into the car and actually make the apex. If you find that you're braking a little bit too late or too hard, you might lock the fronts or just not quite get the car slow to the apex. That can cost you a ton of time. So when you're learning the track, focus on hitting the apex to start with, and then just brake a slight bit later as you're working up to the limit while still focusing on hitting the apex. Because if you're overdriving the car and you're not close to the apex and you're having to miss the corner, over rotate it, and then get hard on the throttle, which will often induce oversteer, the lap time just disappears. So braking quite late here, using a lot of pedal input, rotating the car whilst on the brakes to really maximize the front end, is you really need to get it rotated through here to about a medium apex, not taking too much curb as you don't want to unsettle on the curb, and then accelerating hard out. There's a lot of track out there to catch the car in, so you can really push it on exit. And I like to get down the second gear there to really use the available engine power. Now on this corner, it is not flat in this car. Some people coming from open wheelers would be used to it being flat, but you have to really maximize your throttle input here. You're entering from the far right on the curb to minimize the angle on entry. Then lifting just a tiny bit on entry and making sure you clip this inside apex and driving the car out wide. If you miss this apex on entry, there's a very bumpy bit of track out there and grass to catch the car, which can both get you an off track and spin. And you also have to bring the car back to the left for the next apex, so it's important not to get caught out in the right hand side there. So you dart the car immediately to the left here and brake hard, but don't go down too many gears. You really want to make a rather long, wide input into here. So just a nice arch shape, taking about a medium apex, then accelerating hard out. The track on the exit is quite bumpy, but this is one of those corners where you can lose a lot of time if you're not really pushing the limit. You really have to carry a lot of front end speed through there, but you don't want to miss the apex and run out wide and grab the gravel, or else it could be one track and you lap over. That's a lap. That's a 1:58.7. And now I'll show you the lap in full motion. Around Road America, in any car, and also this car of course, it's really about finding the limit, making sure you're getting the apex, and then you can start to really push the limit of the tires and the throttle. I'm still sort of adapting to this car, so took me a little bit of time to really find that comfortable limit around here. But once I found I was getting the car rotated on the trail braking, hitting the corner, and not overdoing the throttle, it all started to become smooth, and therefore the lap time started to come. If you're fighting the car and having to make a lot of corrections, the lap time does really get away from you around here. And there's a lot of grass and bumpy exit curbs to punish you. Here's the lap in full speed.